Welcome back to Never Enough Novels. Today I'm counting down the top 5 books I read in August, starting with number 5 and working my way up to number 1. So stick around so you can find out which book I loved the most this month and why it might just be my favorite book of the entire year. All of the links to buy the books on Amazon are down below, so snag whichever one you're interested in and help support this channel. Also, make sure you hit like and subscribe so you can see even more videos like this. Okay, let's get into it. Starting off with my 5th favorite book of the month, that is Bridesmaid Undercover by Megan Quinn. This is technically the second book in a series, but I just read it as a standalone and still greatly enjoyed it. However, since I loved it so much, I'm actually probably going to go back and read the first book, Bridesmaid for Hire, anyway. There are some plot points that will be spoiled by reading Bridesmaid Undercover first, but honestly, since it's a romance book, you pretty much know that the romantic interests are going to get together anyway, so it didn't really affect the story for me. As for Bridesmaids Undercover, I think this book made me laugh out loud more than anything else I've read this year. I was literally cracking up like in the car, at the gym, trying not to laugh at work while I was listening to the book. It was just laugh out loud funny in so many different parts. The writing is just incredibly snappy, and there's so much self-deprecating humor, which I thought was just hilarious. For the basic premise, Everly is heading up the Bridesmaid for Hire program of the Magical Moments by Maggie company, and she is offered her first gig as a way to help out the maid of honor of one of Maggie's brother's friends. Hardy, who is Maggie's brother, also sees a way to try and get Everly on his side as a potential wingwoman. Since the maid of honor, who Everly will be working closely with, is his former college love, he is going to try and win her back. Everly kind of accidentally agrees to the scheme. She has a major crush on Hardy, and she thought he was initially asking her out, and she kind of immediately says yes, and then realizes that he's actually asking her for help winning over someone else. But she still agrees to it, and they kind of set off on this series of like misadventures together. They're trying to win over the girl for Hardy, but as Hardy and Everly spend more time together, they're developing something themselves as well. My only gripe with this book is that there were some serious communication issues on Hardy's side, and he does eventually acknowledge them and try to fix them, but it just got a little bit frustrating to read over and over again. But other than that, this book was absolutely a delight, and I can't wait to go back and read the first book in the series. My 4th favorite book of the month is Elizabeth of East Hampton by Audrey Bellezza and Emily Harding. Calling all Pride and Prejudice fans, I have got a book recommendation for you. This is a modern adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, and it features Elizabeth, who is living in the East Hamptons and trying to help keep her family's bakery afloat. At the beginning of the summer, city boy Charlie and his prickly friend Will stumble into the bakery and end up becoming a huge part of the Bennets' lives. While Charlie and Jane immediately hit it off, Elizabeth and Will do not. As we all know, Will starts to meddle in Charlie and Jane's romance, and when Elizabeth finds out, she is pissed. But Will has his own personal connections to the Hamptons as well, and one day when Elizabeth finds him at his family's home while she's surfing, the two start to open up to each other. I loved seeing how the authors took key moments from the original Pride and Prejudice and modernized them. There's so many nods to the original story, but this plot feels fresh and contemporary. This was also just a fun peek into the lives of people who live in the Hamptons year-round versus just the rich city people who stop by as tourists for the summer. These two authors also wrote an Emma adaptation, which was called Emma of 83rd Street, and I read that and it was probably one of my favorite romances of last year, so I'm so excited to see what they tackle next. Book number 3 on my list of my favorite August reads is Not Another Love Song by Julie Soto. Not Another Love Song is set in the world of music with a violinist as our female lead. I'm not normally a huge fan of books about like music or musicians or rock stars, but this dive into the world of classical music was fascinating for me. It added a unique spin to the story, and honestly, who knew that cellos and violins could be so sexy? As musicians, our main characters, Xander and Gwen, are complete opposites. Gwen is a violinist in the Manhattan Pops Orchestra, and Xander is a literal classic music rock star. He is full of passion and energy and a little full of himself, and when he joins the Pops for a season, he doesn't even notice Gwen. At least until she is offered the spot of first chair. And now he notices her and he is not happy. He was supposed to be the one to take on that role. Since Xander is still leading the cellos, he and Gwen are now forced to work together quite a lot. And they realize their chemistry is insane, but their attitudes toward each other are not great. That is until they start to create their own music together, and they realize that they are magic when they are composing together. Their compositions and their blooming romance set off a public frenzy. Suddenly, everyone wants a piece of these two, but it ends up tearing them apart more than bringing them together. This has the same enemies to lovers tension that we found in Julie's first book, Forget Me Not, which I also adored. So it leads to some delicious tension between these two. This is one of those books that I wanted to both savor and absolutely devour. It 1000% lived up to my expectations. On to book number 2. This one is Close Knit by Jenny Colgan. Yet another perfect, sweet romance from one of my all-time favorite romance authors, Jenny Colgan. In Close Knit, Jenny takes us back to a small town in the Scottish Islands where we meet a local girl named Gertie. Now, Gertie has been living with just her mother and her grandmother her whole life and mostly interacts with them as well as their knitting circle. So she's feeling a little bit stuck, and she finally finds an opportunity that may just shake up her life a little bit. In pursuit of a crush, Gertie takes a job working at the tiny local airline, and she ends up unlocking this desire to be in the sky and see more than just the island that she's lived on her whole life. During her time there, when a storm leaves a school group stranded on one of the nearby islands, Gertie finds the courage within herself to help tag along for the rescue mission. And she discovers that the school group happens to include her former high school crush, who is now one of the local teachers. He never really noticed her in the past, but her courage as part of the rescue and their new blooming friendship leads to a romance that Gertie wasn't expecting, but might be exactly what she was looking for. Jenny writes such charming stories and characters that you honestly can't help but want to pack up your stuff and immediately move to one of these little towns and start living a new small town life. Her novels feel like a warm, cozy hug, just consistently delightful and sweet. I honestly adore them. And that brings us to my number 1 book of the month. I'm stepping out of the romance genre and sharing what might possibly be my favorite book of the entire year, and that is Worst Case Scenario by T.J. Newman. I am a T.J. Newman superfan, so this was already one of my most anticipated books of 2024, and I was beyond excited that it absolutely delivered. It captivated me so much that I read it in less than 24 hours. She continues her style of heart-pounding, incredibly realistic disasters with a story about a plane that crashes into a nuclear power plant. The implications of the situation are catastrophic, and the tension starts building immediately. We follow along as various characters involved in the situation deal with the fallout, from workers at the nuclear power plant to emergency personnel who are dealing with accidents and issues that arise from the plane parts falling in different parts of the town, to people who are helping with evacuation orders. We've got sons and daughters and grandparents and wives, everyone involved and their families. I absolutely devoured this. From start to finish, I was enthralled by the characters and how they handled the situation. The idea of this type of scenario and the sacrifices that are needed in a situation like this was completely captivating. I not only learned a lot about how a nuclear power plant actually works, but felt like I was living it right along with the characters. It was tension-filled and dramatic, but also heartbreaking and hopeful, and just ran the gamut of emotions with this book, but it is easily going to be one of my top books of the year. I hope you'll love some of these books just as much as I did. If you want more monthly recaps, you can see quick reviews of all the books that I read in July right here.